Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us, and welcome to today's virtual demo, the non-invasive blood pressure measurement in rodents, considerations, and best practices. I'm Sarah McFarland from the events team here at scientist.com, and I'm happy to be your host for today's event. Our speaker today is Dr. Atul Walunj, a technical resource scientist with Kent Scientific and a research veterinarian specializing in animal physiology. His focus includes technical support, product development for anesthesia and physiological monitoring, and outreach activities in lab animal science. Before I welcome Atul to present, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping notes to help you get the most out of your experience today. So first, take a look at the interactivity panel at the right of your screen with 4 tabs: chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. We want this to be interactive for you, so please send your questions, thoughts, and comments using that Q&A tab, and we'll try to address as many of your questions as we can at the end of the demo today. You can also explore some links and documents in the Handouts tab to learn a little bit more about the systems shown. Lastly, if you're having any technical issues, please try refreshing your browser and ensure that you're using Google Chrome to access this event, as it is the most stable browser. And if you're still having trouble, you can reach out to me via private chat, and I'll help you to troubleshoot. And we do have some polls before we get started today, just to get to know you a little bit better. So the first poll is, do you measure blood pressure using the CODA system in your lab? So there's 3 options there. Yes, I do. I use a different NIBP system, and no, I do not. We really appreciate your feedback in these polls. And just a reminder that these polls will stay open for the duration of the demo. So if you want to answer them later, please feel free to do that. Next poll here is, do you monitor tail temperature during blood pressure measurements? So there's a couple options there: yes, no, and I don't do these measurements. So if you don't do blood pressure measurements in your lab, you can just choose option C there. And lastly, we have, do you train your animals in the NIBP system prior to the experimental protocol? So again, yes, no, and if you don't do those measurements, you can select option C. And while everyone is answering those polls, I am just going to play a quick video that Atul wanted to show.
Kent Scientific's non-invasive blood pressure systems accurately and safely measure systolic and diastolic blood pressure in mice and rats. The CODA tail cuff blood pressure systems utilize volume pressure recording sensor technology to measure the mouse or rat tail blood pressure. The CODA high-throughput system is cost-effective and requires no implant surgeries, yet still provides up to 99% correlation with telemetry and direct blood pressure measurements. At the end of each blood pressure reading, the CODA software will display a graph for each animal. This graph is indicative of the signal strength of the reading and is helpful for troubleshooting. The red line represents occlusion cuff deflation, while the blue line represents VPR cuff pressure. As the occlusion cuff deflates, blood will flow back through the tail across the VPR cuff, which is represented by an upward curve in the blue line on the graph. Heart rate pulses are notated by short vertical lines and are measured towards the end of the cycle. Systolic and diastolic measurements are noted at the bottom of the graph. At the end of the session, the CODA software will offer options for data management. You may save a simple report for manual data analysis or a full report for software-calculated data analysis. The CODA software will also retain each of the graphs for every reading for later review. Kent Scientific's CODA non-invasive blood pressure systems have several advantages over other rodent blood pressure systems and are clinically validated against telemetry.
Okay, and with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Atul to the floor. Atul, take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction and for playing the introductory video. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this presentation on non-invasive blood pressure measurement in rodents. Throughout this presentation today, I'll be discussing some of the key elements of rodent thermoregulation and how these factors really emphasize the need for inclusion of best practices to ensure accurate blood pressure measurement using CODA system. So, starting with the introduction, non-invasive blood pressure, that is NIBP devices, offer an indirect way to measure the arterial systolic blood pressure and serve as a quite popular alternative in preclinical research groups. This is because they provide quite a good accuracy comparable to that of the gold standard, that is radiotelemetry. And therefore, they're also recommended for high throughput studies and for experiments that require comparing the average blood pressure across different experimental groups. Depending upon the NIBP working principle, they are classified as per photoplethysmography, piezoplethysmography, and volume pressure recording sensor technology, which uses a tail cuff technique as seen in the CORA system. Amongst all these technologies, the volume pressure recording sensor technology is most widely used because it delivers the highest blood pressure measurement accuracy. One of the key factors in successful blood pressure measurement is understanding the rodent thermoregulation, as it helps to control two of the most important variable factors, first being the tail vasomotor tone and second being the restraint-induced stress. And both of these factors heavily rely on animals' thermoregulatory state during the experimental period. By managing these variables effectively, we can boost the accuracy of blood pressure readings, thereby ultimately enhance the reliability of volume pressure recording sensor technology, which is used in the CORA system. Let's move on to the 101 of rodent thermoregulation. In general speaking, laboratory mice usually prefer to be in an ambient temperature that is somewhere around 4 to 6 degrees below their core body temperature at any given point of the day. For example, if the core body temperature of the mice is around 36 degrees, the preferred ambient temperature would be somewhere around 30 to 32 degrees. However, in most of the vivariums, the animals are maintained at a temperature ambient range of 22 to 26 degrees, and this indicates that the animals are subjected to and experience a chronic cold stress, which results in altered thermoregulatory process. And this altered thermoregulation is not a let alone physiological phenomena, but is strongly connected with major changes in the animal metabolism, gut microbiome, cardiovascular parameters as well. And therefore, with keeping these considerations in mind, many of the scientists now recommend practices like pre-warming of the animal, which is beneficial so that the animals are thermally comfortable during the experimental period as well. Let's talk about some of the thermoregulatory challenges because of the unique anatomy physiology of the animal. So unlike larger mammals, rodents have a high surface area to volume ratio, which is a known fact, which makes them lose body heat at a much faster rate compared to other mammals. To compensate for this rapid heat loss and also maintain the homothermy simultaneously, rodents generally have a higher metabolic rate than compared to other mammals. However, when they are exposed to chronic cold environments, such as temperatures ranging from around 20 degrees, they experience a significant thermal deficit, and they are further forced to increase their metabolic rate through thermogenic activation. For example, if mice are housed at range of 20 degrees, they expend twice the energy than those who are housed at around 30 degrees. And as I mentioned earlier, this substantial adjustment in the thermoregulation is strongly linked with major and significant changes in metabolism of the animal, cardiovascular functions, immune responses, and a dramatic shift in the gut microbiome as well. Since we are talking about the CORA system, which is using the animal tail for blood pressure measurement, let's discuss some of the key thermoregulatory feature, that is the vasomotor tone of the animal tail. One of the very interesting feature of this is that the vasomotor tone of the animal tail is under complete voluntary control of the animal. That means based on whether the animal is feeling warm and cold, the animal will vasodilate or vasoconstrict its tail. And I'll further discuss about this, how this is implicated in CORA system. So as per a popular postulate, rodents which are housed at different temperature ranges exhibit distinct metabolic profiles, altered physiology, and phenotypic changes, which I've already discussed. So what is the impact of this housing temperature on blood pressure in general. To put this into the perspective of blood pressure in an adult mice, which is as a physiological response to housing temperature, for every 1 degree drop in the ambient temperature below 30 degrees, the mean arterial pressure of the adult mice increases by approximately 2 millimeters of mercury. And this is a very significant variable in hypertension research. And therefore, many of the scientist groups are now recommending to house the mice at their respective thermoneutrality so as to ensure that the accurate modeling of human physiology, diseases, and therapeutic responses can be done. This is specifically because at their respective thermoneutral zones, both mice and humans share a metabolic similarity and characteristics, which can further improve the predictability and relevance of research findings. In simple terms, this will improve the translation of animal studies to human physiology and therapeutics. Now I'll shift my focus to how thermoregulation specifically affects the blood pressure measurement in the CODA system. For accurate blood pressure measurement using VPR sensor technology, two key factors are very important. First being the optimal tail blood volume, and second being adequate tail blood flow, both of which are heavily influenced by the vasomotor tone of the animal's tail blood vessels. This tone, as we have discussed earlier, is under voluntary control of the animal, meaning if the animal is feeling quite warm, the tail will be vasodilated, and if the animal is feeling quite cold, the tail is going to vasoconstrict in order to conserve the body heat. So let's discuss both the such scenarios. First being normothermia. When the animals are in their preferred ambient temperature, they maintain normothermia, ensuring proper tail normotension and blood flow. This is typically reflected during the experimental conditions or experimental period using CODA system when the ideal tail temperature is around somewhere 32 to 35 degrees. However, in the second scenario, that is in hypothermia, this particular condition can occur during the blood pressure measurement system using CODA system due to multiple factors. First being restraint-induced stress, second being anesthesia-induced hypothermia, and third, simply by exposing the animal during the experiment to cold surfaces without providing any adequate thermal warming or thermal support. So all these factors can trigger tail vasoconstriction, thereby ultimately reduce the tail blood flow and further compromise the accuracy of blood pressure readings. All right. So keeping all these factors and considerations, we have enlisted some of the proven mitigation strategies or practices which can definitely help significantly in improving the NIBP accuracy using the CODA system. First and foremost being is to create a quiet and calm environment, and this applies to all animal studies, not just to blood pressure measurement studies. It is very critical to make sure that the lab space is noise proof, because most of the blood pressure measurement studies are conducted during the daytime, which happens to also to be the resting period or the resting phase of the mice. That's why it's quite critical to make sure you scan the lab area where the animals will be worked upon to make sure that they are vibration free, noise free, and also there shouldn't be any excessive lighting as well. So the second recommendation is to minimize the duration of restraint, which applies to all the animal handling techniques. And this can be improved by using modern handling techniques such as cupping method or tunnel method, as you can see in the photographs. This can be successfully implemented by the laboratory person by pre-training them before the experimental duration. Third is what we have observed is that the blood pressure readings are quite accurate when they're done in presence of the home cage. This has something related to reduce the stress in the animal. They are somewhat comforted in this particular practice. Fourth is appropriate size of restrainer or the CODA holder. This is very important. The CODA holder or the restrainer should be of animal size specific. They should not be too restrictive, nor they should be movement promoting. For example, if the coda holders are quite large, they will allow the movement of the animal. And if at all there is any movement during the blood pressure measurement, that will contribute to inaccuracies in the blood pressure measurement. However, when the system is or the holder is quite restrictive, this will create discomfort to the animal as well. Moving next to habituation and acclimation, two different things but very important. First being is habituation. That means the animals should be habituated of being inside the coda holders or animal restrainer for a particular length of time during the experimental period. And this can be successfully achieved by pre-training the animals, as we recommend that should be for 2 to 3 weeks prior to the experimental period. Another important thing that can be done is just by keeping the coda holders into the cages of the animal so that they are used to being inside them and seeing them, and this will help immensely in reducing the stress of the animal during the experimental period. Next, coming to acclimation, the animals should be somewhat acclimated to the entire regime of blood pressure measurement, meaning that means they should be better adapted to the pressure changes that are brought by the tail cuffs, that is O cuff and the VPR cuff. This also can be done by pre-training the animals 2 to 3 weeks so that there is no abrupt changes in the heart rate of the animal or the blood pressure changes. This acclimation is so very important that the coda system also has inbuilt in their system. That means we have around 4 to 5 cycles which are considered as acclimation cycles during the experimental period as well. However, we recommend that the animals are acclimated to the entire regime of experiment 2 to 3 weeks earlier. One of the very important factors is thermoregulation, as I mentioned. In that regard, we always recommend that you pre-warm the animal holders when you're during the experimentation. This will help in two ways. First, it will make sure that the animals are thermally comfortable, keeping in mind that how vivariums maintain the animal at a cooler temperature. And second, it will also prevent any hypothermia to the animal, because if the animal holders are quite cold, that might be a contributory factor to the, as a cool surface and contribute to hypothermia in general. So keeping all these things in mind and implementing these best practices will significantly improve the accuracy of blood pressure change measurement. Moving on to the next topic. In some of the animal studies, it is quite important that the blood pressure measurements need to be done under anesthesia, which can be also quite challenging because the major issue is keeping heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature stable under anesthesia throughout the experimental duration. This is because specifically the anesthesia itself has a major effect on the cardiorespiratory functions of the animal that can affect the physiological data that we collect and further mislead the experimental interpretations as well. So regarding that, So regarding the general anesthesia during blood pressure measurement, two anesthetics, that is isoflurane, which is inhalant-based anesthetic, and ketamine-xylazine, which is injectable, ones are mostly and commonly used in rodent research because of their better efficacy and greater margin of safety. These anesthetics, however, modify the normal blood flow and the pressure within the animal. For example, isoflurane is known to be a vasodilatory agent, and ketamine-xylazine is known to have a vasoconstriction in the animal, and thereby these agents can alter the blood circulation as well as the pressure in the animal. And therefore, it is quite important and critical to consider the individual effects of these anesthetics and their impacts on your hypertension research or cardiovascular research in general. Now let's talk about why and how general anesthesia leads to hypothermia as it impacts, the animal thermoregulation and blood pressure measurement accuracy in general. So all the anesthetics in general cause a functional depression in the thermoregulatory center of the brain, that is hypothalamus. And this results down into redistribution of the warm core blood to the peripheral cool areas of the animal body. And this is where the body heat loss rapidly occurs by two major routes. One is conduction and second is radiation. So all these events, physiological events, or I would say pathophysiological events, leads to three major downfall effects. First being rapid body heat loss is increased. Second, the detection of the body is decreased. And third, thermogenic corrective actions are also suppressed. So all this collectively results in substantial lowering of the body temperature, leading to hypothermia during anesthesia state. Now the question comes, okay, if we at all we have to use anesthesia, which anesthetic agents to opt for? So this particular slide is a very important slide which will help in making a decision in ruling out which one to opt for and which one to not opt for. Specifically when we compare inhalant anesthetics versus injectable ones. So when we talk about this comparison, we need to take into consideration the hypothermic severity and recovery period, two major important things. So with injectable anesthetics, the hypothermic severity is much more greater than compared to the inhalant anesthetics, as well as the recovery period is much more prolonged. So we always recommend, if at all you have to use anesthesia, opt for inhalant-based anesthesia, because it will reduce the hypothermic severity than compared to injectable one. And also the second beneficial effect, for example, if you're using inhalant based such as isoflurane has a vasodilatory effect, and it will somehow contribute to keeping a normal blood flow to the tail of the animal by its vasodilatory effect in the animal. Since we have discussed about what are the pathophysiological effects of anesthesia and how it is critical to properly manage the anesthesia during blood pressure measurement, two important warming strategies that I would like to convey over here. First and foremost is to monitor the body temperature. Perioperative monitoring of the rectal temperature is very important so that immediate response can be taken if at all the animal experiences hypothermia. And second thing is choosing the right anesthetics. We've already discussed this, why to opt for inhalant anesthetics over injectable one. When we talked about the warming strategies, there are a couple of warming technologies which are available in the market, ranging from FIR-based warming systems, gel packs, infrared heating lamps, circulating warm water blankets. However, all these warming technologies have their own pros and cons, and their efficacy depends upon the technology they use. However, based on the observations, the warming technology that's being most efficacious is the one that has a feedback initiated loop system, meaning the warming system will continuously monitor the rectal temperature of the animal, and based on that, it will change its heat output that is being provided to the animal. And this is very important and critical when you want to maintain throughout the experimental duration a particular temperature for the animal. For example, if you want to maintain your animal at around 36.5 degrees throughout the experiment, this particular system or technology can help you do that. All right. So the next slide is based on the recent trend in research in the area of rodent general anesthesia and the best practices that have been recommended to prevent hypothermia in the first place. And I feel, although this particular research is in the general anesthesia, this can immensely help in blood pressure measurement protocol when you have anesthesia as one of your key variable factors. So two of the most important factor of best practices I will discuss is first is pre-warming and second is induction warming. So why pre-warming and induction warming? So in general, whenever we anesthetize the rodent animals, we provide whatever thermal support that is being provided to the animal, which is only during the recovery period and in the maintenance period. That is when the animal is on the nose go. We neglect and do not provide any thermal support during the induction period because it is a very brief and short period. However, the induction period is one of the most critical period because it is where the animal first experiences hypothermia during the entire anesthesia protocol. So what we actually do is we let the animal enter the hypothermia and then we correct the hypothermia that's already set in the animal by providing thermal support to the animal during the nose cone period. However, that shouldn't be our goal. Our goal should be to prevent hypothermia in the very first place, and that can be done by induction warming and also one step further, pre-warming of the animal. So how does pre-warming work, or what is the concept? So pre-warming usually works by increasing the skin temperature of the animal by around 4 to 5 degrees with the goal to develop a thermal skin barrier. This thermal skin barrier will significantly reduce the rapid heat loss that usually occurs from the body during anesthesia and thus prevent peripheral vasoconstriction that usually happens later in anesthesia. So this will help in maintaining adequate tail blood flow, which is also critical for blood pressure measurement. And therefore, integrating these best practices, of course, they are more related to anesthesia, but integrating these anesthesia best practices into blood pressure measurement protocol will definitely help in improving the tail blood flow and also indirectly improve your accuracy of blood pressure measurement as well. Lastly, these are some of the reportable conditions which we highly recommend that every researcher should document in their research protocol so as to make sure that they are published to avoid any variable factors that can bring about biasness into your blood pressure measurement accuracies. So we highly recommend that you document these factors when you do your experiments using CODA system for blood pressure measurements. Right, I guess.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Atul. Before we enter the Q&A, I am going to play that video for you now, if that's
Thank
okay.
you so much.
If you are working with anesthetized animals, additional warming is often required to obtain sufficient tail blood flow. Anesthetic agents induce hypothermia-associated vasoconstriction in the tail vessels, indicated by a low tail temperature. Pre-warming the animals and inducing slowly with inhalant anesthetic agents at a lower concentration over a longer period of time can help to prevent drastic decreases in body temperature and blood flow.
Okay, and so with that, we are going to jump into our Q&A session. Atul, I'm going to bring you on camera here. There you are.
Thank you so much for listening to the presentation.
Yeah, and it was a great presentation. I hope the audience enjoyed it. We do have a great number of questions here, but I'm going to encourage the audience to continue to submit them. If we don't get to them today, that's okay. I'm going to pass them along to Atul, and he will take a crack at them on his own after the demo today. Okay, so the first question here is thinking about the natural habitat of mice, it becomes obvious that they rarely live in spaces where it's constantly above 30 degrees Celsius. Is it actually recommended to house mice in warmer temperatures?
I would put in a way that it is recommended that mice be housed in their thermoneutral zone. So thermoneutral zone refers to the temperature ranges. It differs for daytime and it differs for the nighttime as well. So it is a temperature range at which the animals do not have to further, put much expenditure in terms of energy to maintain their normal body temperature. That means there won't be any further added expenses in terms of for generating the body heat or also dissipating the body heat. So what we recommend is to maintain the animals in a vivarium somewhere in the temperature range of 30 degrees to 31 or 32 degrees. So let's say 29 to 32 degrees is their thermoneutral zone. And also with the caveat that the thermoneutral zone is highly specific, species specific, and strain specific, as well as specific to the physiological status, whether the animal is lactating, breeding, neonate, or adult. So it comes down to a very specific range of temperature.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. The next question here is 2 to 3 weeks of acclimatization to the restrainers and tail cuffs for all the cycles of NIBP measurements. It says sounds too long. Wouldn't 3 to 4 days be good enough for acclimation?
We recommend 2 to 3 weeks because usually, even if the animals are in a particular lab, they would require acclimation if they are not in the central vivarium. If they are transported to a different lab, it is a common and general practice to provide acclimation to the animal to that specific particular lab environment for around 2 to 3 weeks. However, bare minimum, we would recommend to do it for 1 week at least, not just for acclimation of the animals, but also training the lab person. For example, if a new graduate student joins a lab, he should be quite proficient in modern animal handling techniques, but also the animal should be used to him of handling. So that's why we recommend 2 to 3 weeks. However, if your protocol is not allowing that, minimum 1 week.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there's a few questions in here about like length of training time and whatnot. So you're recommending 2 to 3 weeks, or at minimum 1 week, and hopefully with the same person doing all of the. Okay, great. I will skip some of those questions then. Someone has asked, can we simply leave the tubes in the cage prior to measurements in order to habituate or acclimate the mice to the tubes?
Yes, of course. That's a very good or best practices that I've discussed earlier. There's no harm in leaving the quota holders inside the cage of the experimental animals. This will definitely help them getting used to the quota holders, and if you can keep them for the holders for 1 to 2 weeks, we have observed that they are inside the tunnels or the quota holders as well, so they become quite comfortable. And when during the actual experimental period, when you do that, they do not get stressed as they would be for the very first time. So habituation is a very important training that you need to provide to the animal.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions about that, so I'm going to keep going. When acclimating, should we start off with only a few minutes or do all of the cycles every time during training?
We recommend based on your personal experience with the animals. If you have done around 1 to 2 weeks of pre-training of the animal, we still recommend to do the initial by default 5 cycles of acclimation, so that if at all there's any extreme variables or the blood pressure does look off, you can just take it off of your data.
Okay.
That won't be included because it's considered as part of acclimation cycle.
Okay, great. Next question here. What is the lowest weight in mice that is possible to use for your system?
So usually we have seen animal mice that are tested for blood pressure ranging from 15 grams to 40 grams. So that should be the ideal, I would say, the body weight of the animal.
Okay. Another question here. Do you have any videos demonstrating the entire system process during the experiment?
We do have a lot of video resources on our Kent website regarding how to set up the Cora system, as well as if you need more personalized training, we do also offer that through our tech resources department or our sales and marketing department. We can do it in person or virtual as well. So a lot of resources are available regarding that.
Awesome. And I just also wanted to let the audience know there is a few resources in the handouts tab of this demo. So if you wanted to use those to click over to the Kent website at any point today in the next 10 minutes, please feel free to do that. Another question here. Can you please comment on how varying temperatures may affect heart rate and pulse, and thus its effect on the actual blood pressure measurement?
So blood pressure and heart rate are quite correlated, and whatever temperature fluctuations animal face will be reflected in both the parameters. So, for example, if the animals are um, experiencing quite chronic cold environments, definitely the tail will be vasoconstricted, and you will get a very inaccurate blood pressure as well as heart rate data because there won't be adequate tail blood flow and tail blood volume in the tail.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you won't get actual physiological blood pressure as well as the heart rate data, if I have to put it in this way.
Okay. Someone has asked, does the system have a temperature control?
Yes, the Coda platform where you'll be doing the blood pressure measurement, it is also a warming platform, and it has different levels of heating based on what you prefer for your animals. Since we recommend to have the tail temperatures from 32 to 35 degrees, there are different warming levels so as to bring the tail into that temperature range. So, and you also will be receiving a infrared thermometer to measure the tail temperature.
Okay, great. I'm going to keep going here. We've got lots of great questions. This person has asked, do you take the microclimate into account? Usually the room temperature is several degrees lower than the temperature in the nest area.
So yes, for example, if the room temperature is around say 25 degrees, we assume, and it has also been demonstrated that the nest temperature is around 1 to 2 degrees higher because of the if the animal is with its group housing and the depth of the litter material. Is there any enrichment provided to the animal, and also like enrichment like tunnels are provided to the animal? So yes, we do take into consideration the microenvironment of the animal. So we consider 1 to 2 degrees higher than the actual room temperature.
Okay, great. Somebody has asked, if you leave the tubes in the cage, wouldn't the mice chew on them?
No, we have observed that they don't chew on them because they are pretty thick in terms of the material that they are built in. And mice enjoy being inside them because they offer kind of a quite closed, closeted microenvironment. So we have observed that they actually like to be inside them, as with any other enrichment-based tunnels.
Okay. Great. Another question here. Do you need to acclimatize your animals if they're being measured under general anesthetic?
We would prefer that you acclimatize the animal in specifically for animal handling because of course when you handle the animals are in a conscious state. So if they are stressed prior to anesthesia, that's not something that we recommend. So irrespective of anesthesia or conscious state blood pressure measurement, we would recommend handling of the animals. Pre-training of the animals.
Okay. Okay, so even just to get them under anesthesia.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone has asked, is this system also available for rats?
Yes. So the Cora system is comes in two different species, rats and mice as well. So the holder size will change for rats and also based on specific rat body weight.
Okay. Someone's asking for your advice here. We have a portable Coda for blood pressure. We don't use anesthesia, but animal movement inside the holder is one of the challenges we face. And another challenge is getting a consistent reading. What is your recommendation for animal movement in the holder?
So if there is animal movement, we would recommend to cross-check whether the Coda holder is size specific to that animal and also pre-train the animal. As earlier mentioned, keeping the quota holders in the cage immensely helps them to habituate to them, so that during the experimental period they are like all okay, because that's something not new for them of being inside the quota holders for a particular period of time. The moment actually happens because they get stressed out, because for them it's a completely new micro environment. And if at all the holders are pre-warmed, they would be much more thermally comfortable, and they would prefer to be inside the holders, and they wouldn't get stressed enough. So make sure that the quota holders are not too restrictive, not too big. They should be of the particular size, and pre-training of the animal is very important.
Okay. And how do you decide on the size for the restrainer? That's just a question from me.
So yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, the body weight of the animal, and also if you could send us the photographs of the animal, of the representative animals, our sales and tech resources team can definitely recommend you that, hey, go for this particular size of quota holders, and also the tail cuffs, because the tail cuffs are also size specific in mice as well as in rats.
Okay, great. Another question here about mice. Can the mouse version measure blood pressure in mice above 45 grams in body weight?
That is something that we can check internally with the how big the mice is, and using the different sizes of tail cuffs. Something that we can follow up with the researcher with emails.
Okay, great. This person has a very insightful presentation. Thank you. I know you talked a lot about mice being too cold. Is there a possibility that the mice can be overheated or too hot? And if so, how can you tell in the graphs?
So usually when you use a quota system, the mice won't face the problem of overheating, because you will be receiving a infrared thermometer, and if at all the animal body temperature exceeds the limit of, like, the tail temperature exceeds 32 to 35, that is one of the major indicator that the animals are overheating. And also there will be moisture accumulation in the quota holder, and moisture accumulation can mean two things. First, that the animals have urinated inside the quota holders, and second is that their respiratory gases are kind of condensing inside. So it is very important that you measure routinely using the infrared thermometer the tail temperature. Other thing is, if you use a single animal use quota system, the warming support that has been provided is FIR, that is far infrared based warming pad, which also has a homeothermic mode. This is what I've already discussed in my earlier slide, that the system will continuously monitor the rectal temperature, and whatever set temperature you have. For example, if you've set the animal to around 36.5 or 37 degrees, the warming system will only provide enough heat to maintain that particular body temperature. It will not overheat the system. By default, the quota system and the other FI-based warming system have a higher threshold beyond which it will not warm up the system and the animal itself. So there is a alarm as well in that.
Okay, so just to prevent like burns and stuff.
Yes, to prevent burns, yes.
Fantastic. We do have a few minutes left, so I'm going to take at least one more question here. This person has asked, if you don't get a heart rate reading, do you still consider the blood pressure measurement usable?
We would first recommend to cross-check the tail blood flow and the tail blood volume, which is a really good indicator to make sure that whether your blood pressure data is acceptable or not. We have specific ranges of how much the tail blood volume and tail blood flow should be. If the animal is indicating the particular tail blood flow and volume in that particular optimal range, definitely you can go forward with the blood pressure. However, that would be unlikely that you would get a blood pressure, but you won't get a heart rate data.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. If you still have questions for Atul, please submit them now in the Q&A panel, I mean, but you'll also receive a survey at the end of this. If you miss your chance, you can submit them in that survey. Atul, I think that's going to be the last question for today. I want to thank you so much for your presentation and your insights during the Q&A. Really appreciate you being here, and really great job. I hope you had fun.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and I also want to thank our live audience. We know you have busy schedules, so being here live, we know it's really important to us, so thank you. Again, if you haven't answered your polls, you can still head over to the polls tab. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the systems, as I mentioned before, you can head to that handouts tab. Yep. In closing, we hope that you enjoyed this Inside Scientific demo produced in partnership with Kent Scientific, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.